My name is Sinister. Mr. Sinister.
Welcome to IAYTD. This is going to be a short video, but this is just a prediction slash speculation video about Mr. Sinister and the X-Men movies. Now, if you're a diehard fan, you've seen X-Men Apocalypse. If you're not, let me explain to you what's happening. In the end credits of X-Men Apocalypse, we see something called Essex Corps. A lot of you probably thought, I don't know what that is, but some of you recognize the name Essex from the villain Nathaniel Essex, who is known as Mr. Sinister. Now, let me give you a basic primer. Mr. Sinister is a geneticist who's obsessed with making people better and better, and he ends up splicing mutant DNA, trying to create mutants, and he's looking for the most powerful ones. And he does this kind of throughout time, so he's extended his lifespan. I think he was actually born in like Victorian era Britain or whatever, and he's lived this long. So in the comic books, Mr. Sinister, one of his main storylines is with Cyclops and Jean Grey. So this could potentially play into the next X-Men movie, which takes place in the 1990s, where he could potentially try to copy and clone Jean and Scott. Now at this point, they'll be a little older. They'll be in their 20s. So they could start playing with that Jean and Scott romance. And what happens in the comic books is that Mr. Sinister actually clones Jean Grey and replaces her with a clone named Madeline Pryor, who kind of becomes this kind of big villain in the X-Men universe. But Scott doesn't know that, and they end up having a baby. And we will talk in a second about what that means. So they could potentially play into that. So they could do this really cool story where Jean has not been Jean, and Scott has to deal with this, and they could do something really cool like that for the next X-Men movie. Now, this is a genius move to bring in Mr. Sinister because not only is this giving us a plot line for a next X-Men movie, but this could pay off in the next Deadpool movie, and this could pay off in the Wolverine movie. So we could potentially connect all of these weird timelines and different things that are going on with the X-Men movies. We could connect them with one villain. And this is a genius move to help people reconcile all this weird time stuff that's happening. So let me tell you how it connects to Deadpool, because in the next Deadpool movie, they've told us basically that Cable will be appearing, and Cable is a hero from the future. Now, why does this matter? Because Cable is the son of Cyclops and this clone of Jean Grey and Madeline Pryor. So, if they introduce Scott and Jean and Mr. Sinister and they say, yes, there's a baby, but then in the Deadpool movie set in current day, but we have a time traveler from the future that is their son. So now the movies are connected even though they take place many, 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 many years apart. They may not go into too much depth to connect them, but all it takes is a couple throwaway lines from Cable, you know, like, oh, my mom was a telepath, you know, some sort of line like that, and you're like, oh, what? You know, they could easily branch these movies with very little effort. Now, Cable is also a time traveler, like I said, so he could potentially even show up in other movies. So could Cable, the son of Jean Grey and Cyclops, appear in the next X-Men movie to potentially save the day, stop Mr. Sinister, something? So we could potentially see Cable appear in that movie. Will they do it? I doubt it, but they could. Now, the other thing that Mr. Sinister is going to contribute to the general X-Men cinematic universe is likely the introduction of a character called X-23. Now, Mr. Sinister is obsessed with cloning and perfecting, and at the end of Apocalypse, we see him get kind of skeletal X-rays and DNA from Weapon X, which is Wolverine. And gosh, that'd be great to clone potentially one of the most powerful mutants, you know, that we've seen on the big screen, and that's Wolverine, who can withstand pretty much anything. So you can understand why Mr. Sinister would want to play around with that DNA. So imagine if he creates a clone, but this time around, it's a woman. And in the comic books, her name was X-23. She was in the Weapon X program. She was attempted to be a better Wolverine. Kind of also savage for a while, but again, came over to the good side and is now, in the main comic books, actually taken the mantle of Wolverine, that she is the new Wolverine. So it could be some interesting stuff there. And this could play out in different movies. So imagine, Mr. Sinister creates her in 1990, and we see her as maybe the villain, you know, one of his henchmen, something in the new X-Men movie. But we could also see her in other movies because, like Wolverine, she doesn't really age. So we could see her in Deadpool because X-23 and Deadpool served on the same team called X-Force, and they did cross paths, and they have a history with Weapon X. So potentially she could appear there. She could also appear in the next Wolverine movie because Wolverine in all of his movies basically is looking for answers and his origin. And that often leads him back to Weapon X. That leads him, potentially to Sinister, who is cloning, messing around with his DNA. And Wolverine stumbles upon this clone of him that's been wandering around, being an assassin or whatever for 20, 30 years and has to face off against X-23. So she could potentially appear in all of these movies. And this is a genius move because we're going to lose Wolverine. Hugh Jackman has basically all but confirmed that the next Wolverine solo movie will be his last one. And I say almost confirmed because he said multiple times that he's done, and he keeps showing up. So he's said that again, but will that be the case? Probably. So now that Hugh Jackman is gone, the new X-23 can fill that void, that character role on the team, that person, that berserker kind of role, and potentially could be, the next star of the franchise. And you might say to yourself, but X-23 was never really the star of the X-Men or X-Force or anything, but neither was Mystique. And the movies have made her the leader, just like they could make the leader out of X-23. So I know I'm not the first one to think this, but that's just my thoughts on Sinister and how it's going to play out. I think it will tie in to Cyclops and Jean and Cable, and I think it will tie into X-23 and Wolverine, and I think potentially these characters could appear across the entire timeline and maybe create some semblance of continuity and canon, something to tie these together. So I think it's a genius move. What do you think? Let me know in the comments how you want to see Sinister played. Do you want to see X-23 appear? Do you think Cable should time hop back to the X-Men movies? What do you think should happen? Give me your thoughts, and we'll see you next time.
It's possible you might finally be reunited with Jean in the afterlife.